Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about episode 2 of my adventures with Superman's third season titled Mobile Suit Toyman. So let's get on into it. Supervest has come to Metropolis as Clark, Kara, Lois and Jimmy are attending as both vendors and guests, with Supergirl being the big draw as the main staff, the big panel it is holding. We got some really neat little stuff in the cold opening with both Superman and Supergirl teaming up to stop crime around the city, and I love the detail that Metropolis is kind of crazy for Supergirl. They love her, hence why she's the big main star of this super convention, and they even have erected one of the big gold statues in Centennial Park for Supergirl next to Superman's, which is something never we seen before. Like it's something unheard of with Supergirl and Metropolis. Usually, Superman gets the statue and, sometimes there's the Connor Kent Superboy statue. Sometimes it's just Superman and the Eagle. But I like that it's Supergirl this time round and she's actually getting some love from Metropolis and actually being a hero in Metropolis. Something we never really see, and it's really great seeing her actually get the spotlight there for a change. Usually she's, relegated to Midvale, Smallville, or, some other small town away from the big city because, we have already got Superman, which is something that actually comes up a little later on in the episode. During the convention setup, Jimmy reveals the new signal watches he had made, which he gives to everyone in the group in order to stay in touch in case anything goes wrong, and something always goes wrong. Lois also pressures Jimmy into talking with Kara about their relationship, something that Jimmy is a little scared of because he doesn't want to make Kara feel sad or, hurt her feelings, because that might end badly because she is still trying to figure out how human feelings work and how love works, so she doesn't particularly know how to regulate her emotions quite right just yet, and he's worried that could lead to something and lead to a problem for them later down the line. I do like that Kara is still very smitten with Jimmy, and she's just trying everything to be with him, and there's a great part where she actually goes and finds two people who are cosplaying as the Challengers of the Unknown and brings them to Jimmy, being like, oh, I found the people we were cosplaying at. Isn't that great? It's just little things like that, and Jimmy's kind of worried because it's a superpowered being and he doesn't really know what to do. It's really fun to see all that sort of stuff be the foreground. This is like the A plot for the episode. So before I said the group are at the convention because they are vendors, or at least Jimmy is, and it's revealed that Jimmy is actually showing his and the Newsboy Legion's new comic book off. Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, much like the real comic book. This is some pure golden age love right here, right down to the very covers that he shows Clark that are kind of making the comics sell, which are they're those kind of clickbaity covers you'd see in the 50s and 60s, the ones where they have Batman and Superman making Jimmy and Robin dig their own graves, or they wouldn't give them water when they're dying of thirst, stuff like that. And I love his reasonings for stuff like this, and for making Lois the villain of the comic, which is, this is all marketing. This is just all stuff just to sell that book and get that book out there. And I really hope we get to follow his story here with him trying to figure out, what type of, author, writer he wants to be and what type of stories he wants to tell. Lois, meanwhile, is a little bit upset that it doesn't really have a story at the convention because it's all just, fun stuff. She wants a proper story, much like what she did in the first episode with Project Caliban. And she thinks she might have actually got the scent of one as she spots a kindly old man that she recognizes as Winslow Schott, the inventor behind Schott Toys and the Toyman. And Lois thinks that he is up to no good. He's doing something that he shouldn't be doing, which is selling toys, because last time she ran into him, he tried to blow up her and her father with an exploding teddy bear. So she wants to go and figure out what he's doing at this convention and what his game is. While Lois goes and snoops around Toyman's stall, we actually touch in with Bizarro, something I didn't think we'd be seeing, at least not for, 3 or 4 episodes. I thought we'd leave him for a little bit just until you forget about him, and then he comes back into the plot and we find out what he's been up to. But we find out he's actually been pretty lucky, because he not only had Halloween in that first episode to hide in and can kind of disguise himself as, but he's now at this convention and he's dressed up in a Superman suit that's inside out, so the S and everything is back to front. And I just love that, this guy's Broly. This guy, they're doing Bizarro by way of Broly. He's just this big, powerful guy, but he has the disposition of a child, of a 5-year-old, a toddler. And I'm really intrigued to see what they're going to do with that, because usually Bizarro turns evil, or, at least becomes, something that Superman has to fight or go up against. So how are they going to get it from, what he is now, which is this innocent guy who's trying to learn, what being a human is and like being a good guy, to that villain that Superman is going to have to fight? It's going to be a very tragic story. I feel like it's kind of going to mirror in the first episode. I can't believe I missed this, but in my rewatch, we see Clark dressed in his Halloween costume as Frankenstein, and I kind of like that they're going for the whole Frankenstein monster thing with Broly. He's going to get out of control and end up, causing some damage and stuff. Hell, maybe he could be used as some sort of thing that, people think it's actually Superman doing this because they look very similar and he's wearing the same sort of costume. So maybe they think Superman is doing all of this bad stuff and leads to all these sorts of problems. But very intrigued to see what they're going to do with him, especially because it's going to be so tragic, because he's not, outrightly a bad guy or anything. He's just trying to do the right thing. He's inspired by Superman. So yeah, it's just going to be really fun seeing his story throughout the season. As he takes some photos with some Teen Titans, Jimmy and Kara end up almost having a big chat about their relationship, except it gets kind of interrupted by the fact that she has to go and do this panel. But Kara kind of gets the gist of their talk and figures that Jimmy doesn't really want to be with her, or he doesn't feel like he deserves to be with her. And she is kind of hurt by that, just like what Jimmy said, because she doesn't understand what's going on. So she has to kind of deal with that while also going into a interview with Cat Grant, who ends up hitting her with a few really heavy questions in this panel, which we'll get to a little later on. Superman, meanwhile, is actually forced to leave the interview because he has to go and deal with the Whip and her goons who are robbing a nearby bank. The Whip is a really deep cut villain. It's someone who I have not seen in a comic in a very long time. Very, very long time. It's kind of a nothing villain. They use whips. This particular Whip is the second generation Whip. First generation Whip, I think, was like a cowboy guy. But she's the one who exists in like the modern times. And she's had a bit of an upgrade as her whips are kryptonite laced, and she is able to take down the Man of Steel pretty easily with them. Lois's B-plot takes a fairly obvious turn where Winslow, as it turns out, is just a kindly old man who never meant for anything bad to happen, but Lois's blinders make her see no reason. This was kind of the weaker of the subplots for this episode. It doesn't really hit with me because it just feels like Lois learned the whole not judging a book by its cover already in the last two seasons, and we're kind of like retreading things we already saw with the character and not moving to the next story in that progression. Kara's chat with Kat takes a turn when Kat asks her a really hard-hitting question. Why does Metropolis need a Superman and a Supergirl, both who have the exact same superpowers? Why does it need both of them? Kara doesn't actually have a answer to this. It's someone in the crowd that does, and that someone is Jessica Cruz, who picks up the question for Kara and explains that Superman is kind of like their protector. He's the shield, and Kara is actually the warrior. She's the sword, and together they work really well together because Superman protects them and saves them, while Kara fights for them and actually attacks for them and protects them that way. That's a really cool use of that sort of analogy. That's a great dynamic to have for Superman and Supergirl. That's like kind of a winning formula there. And it's also kind of how it is in the comics, because Kara is definitely the more headstrong of the two of the cousins. She's definitely more about, action than inaction, or, saving the people first. She wants to go and hit the threat head on, while Superman is there to protect and save. And I kind of like that they're using that dynamic here in a really positive light, in a really cool way where they work together as a team, hence why Metropolis loves them so much. It's really fantastic, and it's something I really hope we get to see a little bit more throughout the season. I'm sure there's going to be that part once, Cyborg Superman and all that show up where that's put to the test, that dynamic is put to the test, and it might not work out. But yeah, it's really cool that they got to do this, and they got Jessica to do it. Jessica Cruz, who's going to be headlining her own animated series set in this universe, My Adventures with Green Lantern, very soon. I have to assume she's going to get the ring in this season, and then it'll, spin off into her show. It just feels like where it's going. I'm sure a lantern ring will land somewhere and she ends up getting it. Very intrigued to see what they're going to do with Jessica, because this is a Jessica who's a lot younger than her comic counterpart. So does she have all of that trauma that the comic Jessica had, specifically typically stuff like agoraphobia, which maybe she doesn't because she's in with a crowd in a convention. Maybe that's something she ends up getting. I'm really intrigued to see what they're going to go with that character, because it's definitely one of the more interesting, more recent Green Lanterns to show up, and her story is something I really loved, especially through the Robert Venditti era of stuff where he was just giving her so much to do and so much character development from issue to issue. Superman meanwhile learns Whip is trying to take him down because she wants to become the top paid mercenary in the city, believing that Superman is actually paid to do all this. And she has this great moment where she's really disappointed that Superman does not get paid for this, and thinks that he is definitely worth more than what he's, charging, which is nothing. I also really like that the villain kind of, has the hots for Superman, kind of finds him attractive and everything, is kind of fawning over him a little bit, which is something I believe that happened before as well. So I like that that's kind of like a power that Superman has, where he's so charming and lovable that even the villains kind of love him as well. Jimmy meanwhile deals with his own threats as Lex Luthor turns up at the convention, running a stall of his own for LexCorp, who were trying to recruit young, talented people, with Lex wanting to actually recruit Jimmy to LexCorp, something that Jimmy has no interest in, but I think the seeds are already planted, and maybe there's going to be something there later on in the season where Jimmy has to infiltrate LexCorp to figure out what they're doing, and he uses that in that like job interview as like a way in to figure out what's going on. It feels like there's a seed planted there, but as well it's also Lex just kind of like, being the big swinging dick in the room and trying to figure out all these people and trying to like prove that he's like better than them all. While this is also happening, Kara decides she's going to find herself a new suitor and puts the word out throughout the con to anyone who wants to try and be her suitor, come and have a tryout at her booth. And it's a really cool scene where she meets with all these different people. She meets with a guy who Jimmy calls Muscle Jimmy, who is like a big, like jacked version of Jimmy, looks exactly like him. She meets with a mime and can't figure out that like the mime is doing a bit, so she thinks he is trapped in like a force field. Some really cool little bits in there. I really like that. And the whole thing is to make Jimmy, I guess, kind of jealous, just so he realizes what he has. The thing that's right in front of him is staring him in the face and he can't see it. And this is going to make him, go that route to actually see that and actually realize what he is enough for her. It's something like that, I imagine, and that's just going to continuing throughout the season. I think I really love that this has been sort of the crux of the episode, or like the big part of the episode has been exploring Jimmy and Kara's relationship. It was one thing I really liked about that first episode and really glommed onto because it was so different than what we usually get with Jimmy and Kara, but I really liked it, and I'm hoping we get a little bit more of it every single episode. So at this point, the plots are kind of all over the place. Superman is off dealing with the whip, Lois is running down her clues with Toyman, Jimmy is dealing with all his stuff, Kara's off doing her stuff. So they have to all come back together, and they do once Superman deals with the whip. Once her whips with the kryptonite actually run out of power, he's able to take her down very quickly, tying her up with her own whips, and then leaving to get Lois out of a bind as she's confronted Toyman and is screaming at him while these children are all around, and Clark has to kind of come in and sort of like sort everything out. Something I didn't particularly like. I didn't particularly like that he had to, kind of race in and save the day. And it is kind of like sorted out in the same situation where it's revealed that Toyman actually is doing something evil. He wants to get revenge on Lois and some of the other people at the convention, and the entire stall he has transforms into a giant mobile suit Gundam, complete with a Gundam-esque soundtrack to back it up, which is very cool. The one problem I did have with this plot, again, is like I said before, it feels very obvious and very thin, especially for Lois Lane in this show, who's usually had some pretty meaty plots, especially over the last two seasons. For her to just have a plot that feels very much like a lesson she's already learned and that most of the team has actually already learned, it just feels like they didn't have anything for her in this episode, and they just wanted to, bring Toyman in. He's named after the title of the episode is named after him, so it's kind of to bring him into the scene and everything, and get some plots a little later on at the end of the episode sort of shored up, but it just felt very thin to me. Before Clark can actually deal with the mobile suit Toyman, the cyborg Superman ends up showing up and taking him down, something Lex seems to have been counting on on, as he uses the fight to debut Hank Henshaw as the new hero America needs, one who is 100% American and not alien or an outsider. I really dig the new design for the Cyborg Superman in this. I like that he's very much, you know, the LexCorp branding with the Lex sort of symbol on his chest. The suit also has shades of Eradicator. It's very sleek and very like sci-fi alien looking, so it very much looks like a cross between the Cyborg Superman and Eradicator. I'm wondering as well how far they're going to actually go with the Eradicator, Cyborg Superman, whatever you want to call him, plot, because Cyborg Superman started out as a good guy, quote unquote. He was pretending to be a good guy until Mongol came down and bombed Coast City, and he helped him and was trying to nuke the city and all that sort of stuff. So I wonder if they're going to go that route where he is a good guy. Maybe he aids Superman here and there, you know, just trying to outdo him where he can. And then there's that like switch that flicks in him, almost probably literally a switch, where he just becomes full on bad guy and just tries to destroy Metropolis. It's going to happen. And then we get, you know, Superboy involved, Bizarro's there. So it's kind of setting up all of these little pieces, and I'm really excited to see where it's going to go. I do wonder as well whether they might actually pull a twist and maybe actually, you know, get through to Hank in some regard and turn him into a good guy, like a full-on good guy. He has that prior relationship with Lois. You know, Hank very much liked Lois. He knows about Clark and like who he is and his relationship to Lois, so maybe there's like some in there where they're able to convince him to like go against Lex, and maybe he helps them or something. There's a wealth of possibilities you can do with this character, and since they've been doing some really neat and interesting things with Bizarro, it makes me think that Cyborg Superman will get the same treatment. So I really liked this episode. It covered quite a lot of the B plots left over from that first episode and made them the A plots in this episode, much more than I actually thought, especially when it came to Jimmy and Kara's love life, which really hooked me in that first episode. Lois's plot was rather thin and very obvious though, and Superman's was really just an excuse to have him do some action with a really deep cut villain. That side I really appreciate, but kind of separating him off from everyone just so you can do the action kind of felt wrong, and then having him kind of swoop in there at the end and kind of tie everything back together felt very loose and very thin. The stuff with Kara and how she's seen as a warrior to Superman's shield is really interesting. It's a great dynamic for both of the Superman family members, and I hope we continue to see more of that sort of dynamic play out as they deal with the Cyborg Superman in the coming issues. I'm going to give this episode an 8 out of 10.